The great hall of the Aurelian palace shimmered like it had been carved from frozen sunlight. Tall arches curved high overhead, glowing with soft gold light that seemed to come from the walls themselves. The air carried a faint hum, the sound of ancient machines working silently behind polished surfaces. Alien nobles lined both sides of the chamber, their tall, elegant forms wrapped in flowing fabrics that shifted color like oil on water. Their large, luminous eyes followed every movement at the center of the room. Commander Elias Ward stood there in a simple, dark blue Earth uniform, hands clasped behind his back. He looked very small, not just because the Aurelians were taller and more slender, but because everything about their world screamed age, power, and refinement. Their empire had ruled this region of the galaxy for longer than humans had used electricity. Their ships were cities. Their weapons could crack moons. Their culture valued control, grace, and perfect composure above all else. And right now, all of them were watching a human who refused to kneel. An Aurelian herald stepped forward, voice smooth and musical. "Representative of Earth, you stand before her radiance. Seralith the Eternal, voice of the Aurelian continuum. By custom, you will lower yourself in acknowledgement of her supremacy." Elias blinked once. He had practiced this moment a dozen times on the flight over. He gave a small, polite nod instead. "I'm happy to show respect," he said calmly. "But humans don't kneel to people we're trying to negotiate with. Makes things awkward later." A faint ripple moved through the alien court. It wasn't loud, but Elias could feel it. A shift in attention, like a crowd leaning forward. Some nobles' eyes narrowed. Others tilted their heads in open confusion. At the far end of the hall, seated on a raised platform of living crystal, Queen Seralith watched without moving. She did not need to speak loudly. When she did speak, the air itself seemed to carry her voice. "You refuse a gesture of courtesy," she said, her tone neither angry nor warm. "Do humans consider themselves equal to the Aurelian throne?" Elias met her gaze. Her eyes glowed softly, like twin stars behind glass. "We consider ourselves equal to everyone," he replied. "Doesn't mean we don't respect you, just means we stand while we do it." Silence followed. Several Aurelian advisors exchanged glances, subtle flickers of color passing through their garments. Their species' version of whispering. Seralith studied him. Most species trembled under her gaze. It wasn't only authority. Aurelian rulers possessed a natural psychic presence that pressed gently against other minds, encouraging submission, smoothing resistance. She let a thread of that pressure slip toward him. Elias felt it immediately. It was like someone turning up the gravity inside his skull, like a heavy hand pressing down on his thoughts, urging him to lower his eyes, bend his knees, make himself smaller. Sweat prickled at the back of his neck. He locked his jaw. "Nope," he thought. Not today. He didn't have psychic shields. Humans hadn't even known telepathy was real until a few decades ago. What he had was years of training to stay calm under pressure, to function in chaos, to keep going when every instinct screamed to stop. He focused on his breathing. In, out, slow, ha! Steady. He didn't glare. He didn't challenge. He just stayed standing. Seralith felt the resistance like a stone in a river. The current of her will flowed around him, but it did not move him. There was no trained mental discipline, no artificial enhancement, only stubborn, quiet refusal. Interesting. She withdrew the pressure. Elias almost sagged with relief but managed to keep his posture straight. He gave a small, tight smile. "Is that part of the standard greeting package?" he asked. "Or did I unlock a premium feature?" A few of the younger nobles made a sharp clicking sound, the Aurelian equivalent of a gasp. "No one joked with the queen." Seralith's eyes brightened slightly. "You felt it." "Yeah," Elias said. Felt like my brain was being politely squished. And yet, You did not yield, he shrugged. Didn't seem like a good way to start a partnership. The word partnership echoed through the hall. Many species used words like submission, protection, or integration when dealing with the Aurelians. Very few spoke of partnership. Seralith leaned back slightly on her throne. You are aware that your species is young, divided, and militarily insignificant compared to us.
Yup, Elias said easily.
We brought charts. A faint pulse of color ran through the court again. Then why, she asked, do you speak as though you have leverage? Elias hesitated just long enough to be honest. Because we showed up. That answer made several advisors stiffen. He continued, voice steady. Half the species we passed on the way here were too scared to even send a ship into your territory without permission. We came in person. Woo, woo. We're talking face to face. That has to count for something. Seralith considered this. Courage was common in younger species. It usually came from ignorance. But this human did not feel ignorant. He felt aware. Afraid, maybe, but choosing to act anyway. Very well, Commander Ward, she said. You will stand. We will speak as you prefer. A subtle shift moved through the hall. It was small, but every Aurelian there understood what it meant. The Queen had adjusted tradition for a human. Negotiations began. Trade routes, scientific exchange, border mapping. Elias spoke plainly, sometimes too plainly for Aurelian taste, but he listened carefully and asked questions most diplomats were too proud to ask. When he didn't understand a concept, he admitted it. When he disagreed, he said so without insult. Hours passed. At one point, an Aurelian strategist displayed a star map highlighting a region of unstable space near human territory. We advise that your vessels avoid this sector, the strategist said. Gravitational distortions make navigation inefficient. Elias leaned closer to the projection. There's a pre-warp civilization in that system, he said. Third planet. We've been monitoring them for years. They are not spacefaring, the strategist replied. They hold no strategic value. They're people, Elias said. A pause. Seralith tilted her head. You would alter your trade routes to avoid disturbing an undeveloped species? Of course, he said. Wouldn't you? The silence this time was heavier. Aurelian doctrine was clear. Resources were allocated by value, not sentiment. Pre-space civilizations were background phenomena, like interesting weather. We will consider the request, Seralith said at last. Elias nodded, satisfied, as if that were a normal answer. By the time the session ended, many in the court felt an unfamiliar sensation. Discomfort. Not because the human had threatened them. Not because he had shown hidden power. But because he had introduced ideas that did not fit neatly into Aurelian logic. As the nobles began to disperse, Seralith raised one elegant hand. Commander Ward. Romaine. Great. Either I did really well or really badly. The hall emptied until only a few distant guards remained. The massive doors slid shut with a soft chime. Now the chamber felt less like a court and more like a quiet, endless cathedral. Elias stepped forward to the base of the platform. Your radiance? Walk with me, Seralith said. The platform lowered smoothly until it met the floor. Up close, she was even more striking. Tall, luminous, movements precise and fluid. Fine patterns of light traced faint paths beneath her skin, shifting with her emotions. They walked side by side along a balcony overlooking the planet's capital. Towers of crystal and metal stretched toward the sky, ships gliding between them like silent birds.
You disrupted 3 established protocols today, she said. Only 3? Elias asked. I'm losing my edge. She glanced at him. You use humor to manage stress. Yeah.
also to avoid screaming. That earned the faintest flicker of brightness along the lines of her face. Aurelian amusement. "Tell me," she said, "why did you truly refuse to kneel?" Elias took a moment before answering. "Because if I kneel when things are calm, it's easier for someone to expect it when things aren't. And humans, we have a history with that kind of thing. Didn't work out great for us." You feared loss of autonomy. "Yeah," he said, "for my people, not just me." Seralith absorbed this comedy. Most envoys thought of their own safety first. This one spoke constantly of his species. You heavily, she observed. Elias gave a small smile. "Comes with the job." They stopped at the edge of the balcony. Far below, the lights of the city shimmered like a sea of stars. "Your species is contradictory," Seralith said softly. "Individually fragile, collectively reckless, emotionally volatile. Yet you crossed half the galaxy to speak peacefully with a power you cannot hope to defeat." Elias looked out at the horizon.
We're used to being the underdogs. And you believe this will change? He shrugged. Maybe.
"Maybe not, but we figure it's better to make friends early than enemies later." Seralith studied his profile. There was no deception in him, no hidden strategy she could sense, just a simple, stubborn belief that cooperation was worth the risk. "You are not what we expected," she said. Elias chuckled. "Yeah, we get that a lot." She turned back toward the palace interior. "Return tomorrow. We will continue." As he was escorted away, Seralith remained on the balcony, watching the distant stars. In all her centuries, she had met conquerors, geniuses, tyrants, and visionaries. She had never met a being who resisted her power not with strength, but with quiet refusal and a joke. And for the first time in many years, the queen of the Aurelian Empire found herself curious. The second day inside the Aurelian capital began with an emergency. Commander Elias Ward was halfway through a carefully prepared breakfast he didn't understand when the lights in his guest chamber shifted from soft gold to sharp white. A tone pulsed through the walls, low and urgent. A moment later, the door slid open and an Aurelian attendant stepped in, robes flashing quick streaks of violet, the color of alarm. "Commander Ward," the attendant said, voice tight, "Her Radiance requests your immediate presence in the strategic chamber." Elias set down his cup. "That doesn't sound like a bring snacks kind of meeting. It is not." He was already on his feet. The strategic chamber was nothing like the ceremonial hall. It was darker, colder, and shaped like a wide circle. The walls were covered in shifting star maps and streams of data. Dozens of Aurelian officers stood in silent focus, their garments glowing with sharp lines of color as they shared information through their implants. At the center, a three-dimensional projection showed a distant star system. Red markers blinked across its outer colonies. Queen Seralith stood at the edge of the display, hands clasped behind her back. Elias was guided to her side. "What's going on?" he asked quietly. She did not look away from the projection. "An aggressive species known as the Kethra have launched a sudden assault on one of our frontier systems, mining colonies, agricultural habitats, civilian populations." Elias frowned. "How bad?" A section of the display zoomed in. Several orbital stations were dark, debris fields drifting where structures had been. "Initial estimates," Seralith said, "suggest losses in the millions." Elias felt his stomach drop. "And your fleet?" "Mobilizing," she said. "But the system lies far from our core worlds. Reinforcements will take time."
On the edge of the projection, smaller icons blinked: escape craft, cargo haulers, civilian transports. "Those ships," Elias said.
Those evacuees!" Yes, an Aurelian officer answered. "Unarmed.
Many will not reach jump distance before the Kethra advance. So send fast escorts. Buy them time. Our doctrine prioritizes preservation of major assets, she said evenly. Deploying capital ships into an unsecured battle zone without full support risks unacceptable loss. Elias stared at her. You're gonna let them get wiped out because the math says it's inefficient? A nearby officer stiffened at his tone, but Saralith only watched him. Resources must be allocated where they will produce the greatest long-term stability, she said. That is how our empire has endured. Elias ran a hand over his face. Those resources are people. They are citizens, she corrected, and their sacrifice may prevent wider war. He looked back at the fleeing ship icons, tiny and fragile against the red spread of enemy forces. On Earth, he said slowly, we call that a failure. Several officers turned toward him, colors flaring in sharp irritation. Saralith raised one hand slightly, and the room calmed. You would do differently, she asked. Yes, Elias said without hesitation. We'd throw everything we had at getting them out, even if it hurt.
Hurt, she repeated, as if testing the word. Yeah.
Losses. Risk. Maybe even losing ships we can't replace easily. Because if we don't try, then what's the point of having a fleet at all? A silence followed, not offended this time. Thoughtful. Saralith gestured and the projection shifted. The nearest Aurelian task group is 8 hours away at maximum speed. Your species has no military presence in this region. What would you contribute besides opinion? Elias stepped closer to the display. Information. Tactics. Civilian evacuation is something we've had a lot of bad experience with. We learned the hard way. He looked at one of the officers. Do you have real-time telemetry from those transports? Yes. Patch it to me. And get me communication access.
An officer hesitated.
Human systems are incompatible with... Then translate, Saralith said. Moments later, a console rose from the floor in front of Elias.
Symbols shifted, reorganizing into a format closer to human standards. He leaned in, eyes scanning streams of data, ship speeds, fuel levels, vector paths. Okay, he muttered. They're all running straight-line escapes. That's the worst thing they can do. An officer blinked. Direct flight minimizes travel time. Yeah, and makes them easy targets, Elias said. Have them break formation. Random vector changes every few minutes. Make the enemy waste time predicting. That will slow them, the officer argued. Alive and slow beats dead and efficient, Elias shot back. Saralith watched closely. Transmit his instructions, she ordered. Across the display, the tiny ship icons began to scatter, paths turning jagged and unpredictable. Elias kept going. Any of those mining stations still have defense drones? Minimal, an officer said. They are not military facilities. Doesn't matter. Have them launch everything they've got and program harassment patterns. Don't try to win. Just distract.
Orders. Load.
For the next hour, Elias barely looked up. He rerouted damaged transports behind larger cargo hulls, created decoy signals using abandoned equipment, and staggered jump calculations so ships wouldn't all arrive at the same exit points. At one point, an Aurelian medic approached him. Your heart rate is elevated. Stress indicators are high. Welcome to Tuesday, Elias said, not looking away from the screen. Saralith stood beside him the entire time. She did not interfere. She did not correct. She observed. Every decision he made favored the survival of the greatest number of civilians, even when it meant higher risk to infrastructure. He never once asked about mineral output or economic value. Only crew counts. Passenger numbers? Life support status. Transport 7 is losing power, an officer said suddenly. Elias swore under his breath. How many on board? 3,200. He scanned nearby ships. Reroute Transport 12 to tow configuration. They'll lose speed. 12 carries refined ore critical to... Can the ore breathe? Elias snapped. A pause. No. Then move the people. The order went through. Hours passed. The first Aurelian warships finally reached the system, sleek and deadly, driving back Kethra raiders with precise strikes. The red markers began to thin. One by one, the civilian icons winked out, not destroyed, but jumping to safety. When the last transport made it to jump distance, a soft tone echoed through the chamber.
Evacuation success rate 80 to 7%, an officer announced. Murmurs of surprise rippled through the room.
Historical models had predicted barely 50. Elias leaned back at last, exhaustion hitting him all at once. Could have been better, he muttered, but I'll take it. Sarilith turned to him.
You have not rested since you arrived on our world.
Yeah, well, he said, rubbing his eyes. Sleep's easier when you're not thinking about 3 million people getting blown up. She studied his face. Pale, strained, still focused on the display. Why, she asked quietly, do you carry the weight of strangers so personally? Elias looked at her, confused. Because they're not strangers to them. They've got families. Someone waiting for them to come home. That is, inefficient, she said. Yeah, he agreed tiredly. We're kind of built that way. She dismissed the chamber with a gesture. Officers filed out, casting curious glances at the human who had just altered Aurelian survival projections. Walk with me again, she said. They moved through a quieter corridor this time. Windows showing distant stars. Maintenance drones floated silently along the ceiling. In our history, Sarilith said, leaders who allowed emotion to guide strategic decisions caused great disasters. We corrected this through genetic and cultural control.
Sounds peaceful, Elias said. It was stable, she replied.
He gave her a sideways look. Same thing? She did not answer. They stopped at a wide window overlooking the planet's rings, glowing like a halo. Today, she continued, you influenced a military response using emotional reasoning, and the outcome was favorable. Elias shrugged. Turns out caring about people can be a tactical advantage. Who knew? I did not, she said softly. He glanced at her. There was no sarcasm. Only honest confusion. Back home, he said. We mess this stuff up all the time. Wars, politics, disasters. But we keep trying because giving up on each other feels worse than failing. Sarilith watched a distant ship glide past the rings. Your species accepts pain as a cost of compassion. Pretty much. She was quiet for a long time. Finally, she said, I would speak with you again, privately, without advisors, without war. Elias blinked. That sounds less stressful.
I'm in. It will be later,
she said, when you have rested. Deal, he said. As escorts led him back toward his quarters, Sarilith remained by the window. Below, the capital shone with ordered beauty. Above, stars burned in silent indifference. For centuries, she had ruled by logic, by probability, by the careful trimming of variables that caused instability. Today, a fragile, short-lived being had introduced a new variable she could not quantify, a leader who bled for strangers, a species that chose to hurt rather than not care. And for the first time, the Queen of the Aurelian Empire wondered if something vital had been missing from perfection all along. Night on the Aurelian capital did not look like night on Earth. The sky did not go dark. Instead, the upper atmosphere shifted into deep shades of violet and blue, and the stars shone through in sharp, steady points. The city lights below dimmed slightly, not because of sleep, but because the Aurelians preferred balance between light and shadow. Commander Elias Ward stood alone on the balcony outside his guest quarters, arms resting on the smooth railing. He should have been asleep. His body felt heavy, his thoughts slow after the long hours in the strategy chamber. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw blinking ship icons and damage reports. Behind him, the door slid open with a soft sound. He turned, expecting a guard or attendant, but instead Queen Seralith stepped into the open air. She wore no crown, no formal robes, just a simple, flowing garment of pale silver that reflected the starlight. For a second, Elias forgot protocol entirely. He said, straightening. You're ready, Seralith? She said gently. No court, no titles. Not tonight. Bathed the room end. Was it a no? Poor.
He hesitated, then nodded. Okay, Elias.
She moved to stand beside him at the railing. For a while, neither of them spoke. Ships drifted in the sky between distant towers, silent and graceful. You did not sleep, she said at last.
Working on it, he replied. Brain still running emergency mode. You believe the system is safe now? Yeah, he said.
Your fleet's there. Evac's mostly done. Yet you remain troubled. Elias exhaled slowly.
We lost some, didn't we? Yes. He nodded once. That's the part that sticks. Seralith studied him in the quiet light.
On my world, leaders are trained from birth to accept loss without personal burden. Grief clouds judgment. Grief also reminds you what matters, Elias said.
She tilted her head slightly. Explain.
He searched for simple words.
When you lose people, it hurts. That pain tells you they had value. If you stop feeling it, you start treating lives like numbers. Makes it easier to make clean decisions and terrible ones. She considered that. In Aurelian history, she said, there was a period before emotional restraint became law. Our early rulers formed deep bonds. When those they loved died, some made irrational choices that harmed entire sectors. Yeah, Elias said softly. Humans have done that too. Then why keep the risk? She asked. He looked out at the stars.
Because the good parts come from the same place.
Love, loyalty, bravery, sacrifice. You can't cut out the pain without cutting out everything that makes those things real.
A faint glow pulsed along the lines beneath her skin, a sign of internal conflict. You speak as if emotion is a source of strength, she said.
It is, he replied, just not an easy one. She was quiet for several moments. Then she said, walk with me. They moved through quiet corridors, deeper into the palace than Elias had been before. The architecture shifted here, less grand, more personal. Walls displayed living patterns of light that responded to movement, like slow breathing. They entered a wide chamber open to the sky above, a private garden filled with tall glass-like plants that chimed softly in the breeze. This place, Seralith said, is where I come to think without the voices of advisors or the weight of ceremony. Not bad. I've got a ficus back home. It's less impressive. She made a faint sound that might have been laughter. They stopped near a shallow pool that reflected the stars. There is something I wish to understand, she said. You acted today without authority from your own government. You risked political consequences. Yeah, he admitted. Probably gonna get a few angry messages. Why accept that risk? Because waiting for permission would have cost lives, he said. And I can live with paperwork. Harder to live with not trying. She turned to face him fully. Her eyes were brighter than usual, the glow steady. In my position, she said slowly, every action is measured against the survival of an entire civilization. Personal feelings are distractions.
Elias nodded. Makes sense.
Big picture stuff.
And yet, she continued, observing you has introduced disturbance.
He blinked. Disturbance? I find my thoughts returning to your choices, your reactions, your species' way of valuing individuals.
It creates questions about our own path.
Elias rubbed the back of his neck. Questions are good. Means you're still growing.
A ruler of my age is not expected to grow, she said, only to maintain.
Yeah, he said gently. Humans don't really do finished. We're always a work in progress, usually a messy one. She stepped closer to the pool, watching the reflection of the stars ripple.
In our biology, she said, pair bonding among rulers was removed generations ago. Emotional attachment was judged a liability.
We form alliances, not intimate bonds.
Elias listened carefully, unsure where this was going.
Since your arrival, she went on, I have experienced unfamiliar cognitive patterns, increased focus on a single individual, heightened concern for their well-being, a desire for continued proximity. Elias froze.
Oh.
She looked at him directly now. No throne, no distance, just two beings under the open sky. I have studied the data, she said softly, compared it to archived records from before emotional regulation. The conclusion is clear. He swallowed. Seralith, if our species were biologically compatible, she said, voice steady but quiet, I would have chosen you as my life bond partner. The words hung in the air between them. Elias's mind went completely blank for a full 3 seconds. He stopped, tried again. I did not see that coming. I am aware the outcome is impractical, she said.
This is not a strategic statement. It is
a personal truth. He ran a hand over his face, half in shock, half in awe.
Back home, we usually build up to that over dinner.
Or like several months. She tilted her head.
Courtship rituals? Yeah, those. I did not intend to cause distress, she said.
You didn't, he said quickly. Just surprise. Big, galaxy-size surprise. She studied his expression. You do not recoil? No, he said. I'm just trying to process the fact that the most powerful being in this part of space just basically proposed in a garden. Ah, she said softly. That was not my intention.
I do not expect union. I understand the barriers.
Biological, cultural, political. Still, he said gently, that's
A lot to hear. She looked back at the pool. Your compassion altered my empire's actions today.
your presence has altered my thoughts. I wished you to know the depth of that impact. Elias stepped beside her. Seralith, where I come from, feelings like that are an honor, really. But they also come with choice, two people, deciding together what it means. She listened closely. I care about what happens to you, he continued. You're trying to do right by your people. That matters to me. But my life is on Earth. My people need me there. And even if biology wasn't an issue, ruling an empire isn't exactly on my career plan. A faint pulse of dim light crossed her features. Not anger, but something like sadness mixed with understanding. I expected as much, she said. Still, it was necessary to speak. Yeah, he said softly. It was. They stood in silence again, the air cool around them. After a while, Elias said, Back home, we've got a saying. You can't always choose who you feel something for, but you can choose what you do about it. And what do you choose? She asked.
I choose to be your ally, he said.
Your friend, if that word translates, someone who tells you the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. She considered the word. Friend. A bond without possession.
Without expectation of exclusivity.
Exactly.
She nodded slowly.
That is acceptable and valued. A soft chime sounded in the distance, a signal from the outer systems. Sarilith closed her eyes briefly, processing incoming data through her implants. When she opened them, the glow was steady again. The Kethra have withdrawn fully, she said. Our forces secured the system. Survivors are being relocated. Elias let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Good. She looked at him. Your methods will be studied, integrated where beneficial. He smiled tiredly. Happy to corrupt your perfect system a little. It was never perfect, she said quietly. Only stable. They began walking back toward the palace interior. Elias, she said as they reached the doorway, you once told me humans make friends early rather than enemies later, yeah? She met his gaze. Today, you have made a friend in the Aurelian throne. That bond will shape the future of both our peoples. He gave a small, genuine smile. I'll take that deal. As he returned to his quarters at last, exhaustion finally dragged him toward sleep. Behind him, in the quiet garden under the alien stars, Queen Sarilith stood alone for a long time, feeling the echo of emotions her kind had tried to erase. They were not efficient. They were not safe. But for the first time in centuries, she did not wish them gone.